Good afternoon, YouTube. Last week my brother and I went on a battlefield tour of some First World War sites in Belgium and France, Ypres, Arras, Menin and the Somme. While we were there we took a side trip to visit the grave of a relative of mine, and my brother's obviously. I think he was my twice or three times great uncle, John Ernest Albert Saunders, known as Jack. I think it's my great aunt Sue, has done quite a bit of research about him and wrote a piece for the local historical society about him. I'd like to read a section from that. John Jack Saunders was born in Brill, Buckinghamshire, on the 6th of October 1895, the second child of Albert Saunders and Ada Ann Bunyan. Sometime between John's birth and that of his younger brother Albert, known as Ben, in 1900, the family moved from Brill to Coventry, where family law said Albert Sr. was part of the team building Courtaulds chimney. I gather that the factory didn't open until 1905 and the chimney wasn't built until 1924, so whilst he may have worked on the project, it wasn't the reason for the move. In the 1901 census, the family were recorded living at 25 Broad Street, Falls Hill, Coventry. Albert Sr. was a bricklayer, Ada was not working, and the children were Mary, aged 9, John 6, and Albert 6 months. By 1911 they had moved to 9 Highfield Road, Coventry. John, now aged 15, was employed as a machine hand in the motor accessories trade. The Saunders' youngest child, Kate, was 1 year old. This census records how many children born live subsequently died, and the 3 listed probably explain the 10-year gap between Kate and the older children. In early 1914, aged just 18, John, by now known as Jack, travelled to Australia in search of a better life. The letters we found all came from the Melbourne area, so it seems probable that is where he landed. 2 John Saunders arrived in Melbourne during April 1914, according to the Public Record Office of Victoria. One aged 25 on the Militades, the other aged 20 on the Benalla. Our John would have been 18, so he could have been the John on the Benalla, exaggerating his age. The trip would have taken between 6 weeks and 2 months, and the 2 ships mentioned appear in adverts in the Times of the day. Both used the Cape of Good Hope route rather than the Suez Canal, and it seems the trip to Australia would have cost between £15 and £18, one way and third class. On the 1st of May 1914, Jack wrote a long letter to that's Sue's future grandfather, George Pickering, who was not yet married to Mary, Jack's older sister. Reading the letter gives the impression that he'd only been in Australia a few weeks at that point, so arrival on the Benalla would fit. He described tramping around the area looking for work and eventually found decent employment. He made friends there, as later letters indicate he seemed very happy with his adventures. He wasn't there for long, however. After war broke out, Jack was mobilised in Victoria and reported to the authorities on the 13th of August, embarking from Melbourne on board the Berrima on the 22nd of December 1914. That's from the Great War Forum on the Imperial Reservists Board. The Berrima delivered its Australian troops to the Middle East, while the Imperial Reservists continued to England. 1446 Private John E. A. Saunders, 14th Battalion Royal Warwickshire Regiment, arrived in France on the 11th of June 1915, according to his medal record card, but in one of his later letters he refers to battles that took place just before this, in May 1915. An Australian friend of Jack's, Walter Hambridge, wrote to Mary Pickering, Jack's newly married sister, on the 23rd of October 1916, thanking them for a letter and parcel, so contact was obviously well established between Coventry and Australia, as well as from each place to Jack in France. Jack wrote to Mary, calling her by her family name, Polly, on the 3rd of November 1916. He described himself as your broken-hearted brother, as someone called Louis has got into trouble. No specific mention is made of the nature of the trouble, but if it was pregnancy, it seems doubtful that Jack was involved, as there is no evidence that he was recently on leave. This is in the letter in which he refers to battles fought before his official arrival in France. On the 19th of December 1916, the official notice of Jack's military medal appeared in the Edinburgh Gazette, giving the date of the award as the 14th. I have no idea why this was reported in the Edinburgh version rather than London. I have a torn cutting of the Midland Daily Telegraph's report, which scooped the news on the 15th. Jack's act of bravery that won him the military medal was repeatedly repairing telegraph wires whilst under heavy artillery fire. At this time he was with the 2nd Battalion Royal Warwickshire Regiment, so he is not listed in the awards section for the 14th Battalion. The whereabouts of the actual military medal are not known. My father believed it was given to the girl Jack was by then walking out with in Coventry, but didn't know her name. Walter Hambridge wrote to George Pickering, Sue's grandfather, sometime in mid-1917. The dates deduced from the contents. Walter referred to the recent election where the Labour Party were defeated, which happened on the 5th of May 1917, in reply to a letter asking about the employment prospects in Australia. That's surprising, as the war was still in full flow. George Pickering was in a reserved occupation, a toolmaker, and was by now married to Jack's older sister Mary, but obviously thinking of going to Australia himself. George did try his luck, unsuccessfully, in America in 1920. Wally also referred to a letter he received from Jack asking for news of a girl in Australia, so Jack is obviously no longer heartbroken. Jack's name appeared in a casualty list in the Birmingham Daily Post on the 2nd of June 1917. Jack wrote to Polly, that's Mary, and George on the 26th of July 1917 from Ballyvonair Camp, Cork, in Ireland. Ballyvonair was a large encampment and hospital. He didn't clearly say why he was there, but he referred to having been clouted on the 4th of May 1917. So this was probably the reported injury, and he was now recuperating. In a letter, he thanked them for sending him 2 shillings, that's 10p, which he had used for cigarettes and extra food. Questions were asked about Ballyvonair in Parliament the previous year, as the injured men would obviously have preferred to recuperate on home soil. Jack evidently made a good recovery, as he later returned to the front in France, where he was killed by a stray bomb from an enemy aircraft on the night of the 29th of May 1918, whilst asleep in a barn alongside several comrades. He was back with the 14th Battalion. The family received notification from an officer, one of Jack's friends, and the Padre. The officer and friend's letters are both written in pencil, easier to maintain than pen and ink on the front line. The officer refers to Jack having been in line for a bar to his military medal. A Mabel Padgham wrote a letter of condolence on the 21st of August 1918 to Mary Pickering in reply to the news. She was a pen friend of Jack's in Australia, and she referred to some pressed violets that Jack had sent her from Italy, along with some postcards, so he was with the Royal Warwickshire Regiment when they were moved briefly to Italy in 1917. Mabel asked if she may now write to Mary instead. Jack is buried in Thiennes Cemetery, a small site containing just 114 burials in northern France. I have a receipt from the Imperial War Graves Commission dated the 4th of June 1921 for 12 shillings and 10, made out to A. Saunders, Esquire, received in payment for 44 extra letters engraved on Jack's headstone. Jack's medal card in the National Archives does not mention his military medal, but does note killed in action. MM does appear after his name in the 14th Battalion Roll of Honour, however. It's from the Western Front Association Forum. In 1919, the family received the standard commemorative scroll and letter with facsimile signature of George V, along with a memorial plaque dedicated to Jack. This plaque was often called the Dead Man's Penny. They also received his 3 war medals, the 1914-15 Star, the British War Medal 1914-1920, and the Victory Medal 1914-1980, otherwise known as Pip, Squeak and Wilfred, all of which are now amongst my own treasures. That's the end of the section from Sue's research. Knowing all of this, my brother and I went out to Thiennes. It's a very small cemetery, and it's literally in a farmer's field, just walled off from it, as you can see from the picture. It's quite a peaceful place. I mean, when we walked down along a little river, there was a heron flying around. There's no traffic or anything. We originally thought that the inscription which Albert paid for on Jack's gravestone was a reference to his parents, Albert and Ada of Foleshill, Coventry. It actually says, we know now having seen it, "Weep not for him who onward bears his cross to Calvary." It's the first line of a hymn by Thomas Pollock, the Reverend Thomas Pollock, in the Gospeller from 1870. I'm not someone usually given over to emotionality, but I was actually quite affected, as I think my brother was as well, when we went to Thiennes and when we found Jack's gravestone. I know after nearly 100 years it seems in a way like a tenuous connection, but I actually felt really quite moved being there where his last remains are, in a farmer's field, or in a graveyard in a farmer's field in rural France. My thanks to Ian, the tour guide who took us there, and to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who do keep it in remarkably nice condition. Actually, as we were driving there, we saw a War Graves Commission gardener walking away from the site. And it very much reminded me of the famous poem by Rupert Brooke, just called The Soldier. "If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is for ever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by the sons of home. And think this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind no less, gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends, and gentleness in hearts at peace under an English heaven."